Greetings, fellow travelers through the liturgical year. This is Lisa Davis with another Feast Day Quick Take on the feast of St. Hugh. And about the name Hugh. I knew a Hugh in grade school, and I remember as a little kid thinking Hugh was an unusual name. I first thought his name was Yu, Y-O-U, which was disconcerting until Sister had the charity to purposely use his name as an example for the letter H in phonics class. Years later, a family in our circle named their 11th or 12th child Hugh, which again, even as an adult, I thought was unusual. We don't hear the name Hugh often in the States. But I processed it a little differently. Obviously, this was a Catholic saint, as this was a solidly Catholic family, but I never took the time to look into St. Hugh until this week. And this is what I found out. There are not a whole lot of St. Hughs listed in my resources. The Ot 10 Catholic Encyclopedia, the extended Butler's Lives of the Saints, and the Liturgical Year, but each is distinct and inspiring. St. Hugh the Great, also known as St. Hugh of Cluny, a French Benedictine abbot, was one of the most influential men of his era. Highly involved in the diplomacy of the 11th century, it's almost certain that this St. Hugh was a friend and ally of St. Peter Damian, for whose feast day we made a quick take back in February. Just like St. Peter Damian, St. Hugh of Cluny worked toward the general church reforms initiated by Pope St. Leo IX, and also in cooling the jets, so to speak, of numerous hot-headed rulers of the day. Holy St. Hugh also preached the First Crusade and had a special care for the poor and sick. After serving 6 decades as the abbot of Cluny, which, incidentally, was literally the largest church in Christendom at the turn of the first millennium, nota bene, which was later destroyed in the so-called French Revolution, St. Hugh the Great of Cluny met his eternal reward in the year 1109 at the age of 85. He's the patron saint against fevers. His feast day is April 29th. He is truly a holy Hugh of great renown, but not today's St. Hugh. St. Hugh of Lincoln was instrumental in the founding of the first Carthusian monastery in England. A well-respected abbot known for his great personal sanctity, St. Hugh had a beneficial influence upon the British monarchs of his time, a time when British monarchs were still Catholic, but not always good Catholics. The first Carthusian to be canonized, he's known for his fight against the persecution of the Jews in England during the 12th century. He received his heavenly reward in the year 1200. The patron saint of sick children, swans, and shoemakers, he was a holy Hugh of renown, but not today's St. Hugh. We celebrate the feast of St. Hugh of Lincoln on the 16th of November. St. Hugh de Lippi Uguccione was also a holy Hugh of renown, but not today's holy Hugh. This St. Hugh was one of the 7 holy founders of the Servite order, which was one of the 5 original mendicant orders, in excellent company with the Franciscans, the Augustinians, the Dominicans, and the Carmelites. Friars of the mendicant orders, instead of living in monasteries or isolated cells, adopted a poor nomadic lifestyle, preaching and converting in cities and villages, chiefly amongst the poor. An Italian born in Tuscany, this kind of humble, prayerful missionary work appealed to St. Hugh, who ultimately accompanied St. Philip Benizi to France and Germany, serving as vicar general of the Servites in Germany until his death in 1282. He celebrates his feast day together with the other 6 founders of the Servites on February 12th, a holy Hugh of renown, but not today's St. Hugh. And perhaps the most recent holy Hugh of renown, we have Blessed Hugh Faringdon, the abbot of Reading, one of the English martyrs murdered under the reign of Henry VIII during the time of the destruction of the monasteries in 1539. A holy and courageous example of true faith, Blessed Hugh was indeed well known in those days of persecution in England, but he's not today's St. Hugh. All St. Hughs we honor in the annals of the faith, but today's St. Hugh is, drum roll, St. Hugh of Grenoble. His story shares with these five, and with all other saints in general, the foundational prerequisites to sainthood: humility, charity, mortification, unending prayer and hard work, and of course, great love of God and devotion to his holy will. But here is how St. Hugh of Grenoble is unique. Born in 1053, St. Hugh is also known as St. Hugh de Chateauneuf, which was his birthplace in France. He was blessed to be born to pious parents. His father, Odelot, entered the Carthusian order at the age of 80, spending the last 20 years of his life in prayer and contemplation before receiving last rites and holy viaticum from the hands of his holy son. His mother, no less pious, was also assisted in her last moments by St. Hugh. As a small child, this son of holy parents showed every sign of a holy vocation, and according to his biography, written 2 years after his death by the prior of the Abbey of Chartreuse, quote, "Having chosen to serve God in an ecclesiastical state, that he might always dwell in his house and be occupied in his praises, he accepted a canonry in the Cathedral of Valence. In this station, the sanctity of his life and his extraordinary talents rendered him the ornament of that church, and the gentleness and affability of his deportment won him the affection of his colleagues. He was tall and very comely, but naturally exceedingly bashful, and such was his modesty that for some time he found means to conceal his learning and eloquence. Nevertheless, his humility served only to show afterwards those talents to more advantage and with greater luster." End quote. Another Hugh, who was at the time the bishop of our Hugh's diocese, and who later became the Archbishop of Lyons and Cardinal Legate of the Holy See, after meeting young St. Hugh at the cathedral in Grenoble, was so impressed with his piety and character that he enjoined him to enter his household, so to speak, meaning his staff, foreseeing how his intelligence and bearing would assist him in his great task of reforming the see of Grenoble, which had sunk to all manner of sin, laziness, and abuse. St. Hugh was reluctant to be employed in so important a task, feeling himself unworthy. The Archbishop knew better, though, and solved the problem of St. Hugh's reluctance by dragging him along with him to Rome, where he brought the case before Pope Gregory VII. The Pope was equally impressed with St. Hugh, consecrated him a bishop, gave him personal counsel to allay his fears, and encourage him in the monumental task before him, telling him to, quote, "bear his cross with patience and joy." And so back to Grenoble he went, to a see awash with trouble. Along with the general decay of piety amongst the people and the clergy, he found the government of the churches corrupted by simony, usury, and waste, such that on his arrival he, quote, "found nothing either to enable him to assist the poor, nor to supply his own necessities." And so he set himself in earnest to reprove vice and reform abuses. To this purpose he endeavored by rigorous fasts, watchings, tears, sighs, and prayer to draw down the divine mercy on his flock. And so plentiful was the benediction of heaven upon his labor, that he had the comfort to see the face of his diocese in a short time exceedingly changed. End quote. In humility, after 2 years of fine-tuning, he resigned the bishopric and quietly entered a Benedictine abbey as a lowly monk. This lasted for 1 year, before Pope Gregory VII called him out of the abbey to resume his work on the reforms of the Church, this time outside the boundaries of one diocese. In his travels through France he was famed as a great preacher and a powerful confessor. His biographer says of him, quote, "The remembrance of the divine love, or of his own and other spiritual miseries, frequently produced a flood of tears from his eyes, nor was he able sometimes to check them in company or at table, especially whilst he heard the Holy Scriptures read. In hearing confessions, he frequently mingled his tears with those of his penitents, or first excited theirs by his own. At his sermons, it was not unusual to see the whole audience melt in tears together, and some were so strongly affected that they confessed their sins publicly on the spot. In 1084, St. Hugh had the happy providence to meet St. Bruno of Cologne and 6 of his companions, whom he helped to found the great Carthusian monastery, La Grande Chartreuse, high in the French Alps. But he was especially attached to the Benedictine order. As we so often see in the lives of the saints, his heart, so to speak, was at the Benedictine Abbey at Cluny. Throughout all his travels and work, he longed to retire to Cluny to a life of prayer and penance. His personal inclination had never been toward the extroverted life of a bishop. His biographer in summary tells us that, quote, his love of heavenly things made all temporal affairs seem to him burdensome and tedious. At length he begged Pope Innocent II for permission to resign his bishopric and retire to the monastery at Cluny, but he was not allowed that earthly peace. Rather, God chose for him to purify his soul with a long illness. St. Hugh's biographer describes his last days in Grenoble, quote, some time before his death he lost his memory for everything but his prayers. The Psalter and the Lord's Prayer he recited with great devotion, almost without intermission, and he was said to have repeated the last 300 times in one night. Being told that so constant an attention would increase his distemper, he said, it is quite otherwise. By prayer I always find myself stronger. St. Hugh, continues his biographer, left us by his invincible patience a proof of the fervor of his charity. Under the sharpest pains, he never let fall one word of complaint, nor mentioned what he suffered. His whole concern seemed to be only for others. End quote. St. Hugh of Grenoble was finally granted rest in his heavenly reward on April 1st, 1132, just 2 months short of his 80th birthday, after having served as a bishop for 52 years. He was canonized by Pope Innocent II in 1134. St. Hugh is the patron saint of those who suffer from headaches. St. Hugh of Grenoble, bless us and help us to rise to the occasion of the vocations God chooses for us. Help us to do the divine will always, but most especially when it's against our personal inclinations. All St. Hughs, please intercede for us. Blessed be God, in his angels and in his saints.